We're at a time right now where walls are a politically divisive and bitterly controversial issue. But there is one wall that people can't seem to get enough of. The Vancouver Seawall draws millions of people every year. It has a nearly perfect rating on TripAdvisor. It's part of a National Historic Site, and, well, you get the idea. People really love this thing, which is why I'm treading super lightly to tell you that the seawall isn't all that great. In fact, it's kind of terrible.
Cruising, uptown, top down. All the girlies be jocking like, what's up now? High post, switch gears and ride slow.
Okay, before you pick up your pitchforks, hear me out. It helps to understand why the seawall was built in the first place. The year was 1917. The NHL had just started, there was no seawall, and Vancouver had a problem. Parts of Stanley Park were literally disappearing through a process called erosion. Much of the park sits on a kind of rock called sandstone, which isn't very durable. I mean, it's called sandstone for heaven's sake. Waves from the ocean were washing away this rock little by little. With that in mind, the city decided that Stanley Park needed something to protect it, like a wall. And then someone had the genius idea of using that wall as a walking path, and thus the seawall was born. Now, in many ways, this was very successful. The seawall helped Stanley Park become the crazy popular destination that we know today, and more importantly, it worked. It protected the park from any more erosion. But from an environmental perspective, this was kind of terrible. It turns out walls are great at protecting the things behind them, but not the things outside of them. Check out this old photograph of Stanley Park before the seawall and compare it to today. The main thing I notice is just how much sand around the park has been lost. So, what happened here? Well, before the seawall, much of Stanley Park probably looked something like this. You have the sandstone bedrock of the park, which is slowly eroding and adding sand to a beach as the waves hit it. On the beach, you have an array of living things like crabs, clams, kelp, eelgrass, starfish, and other animals. This area is also known as the intertidal zone. Further down, you hit the ocean, which is slowly taking sand away from the beach. Okay, now that I've set the scene here, what happens when you put in a seawall? Well, two things. First off, the sandstone isn't being eroded anymore, so the beach isn't receiving any more sand. At the same time, the ocean is still taking away sand, so the intertidal zone gets lower. And that's when things really start to pick up. I'm no Bill Nye the Science Guy, but I'm going to try to demonstrate something here with my beach lasagna. This is water as it hits a beach. And this is water when it hits a wall. What I'm trying to explain here is that the seawall makes the ocean waves worse because they're crashing onto a hard surface. Those waves take away much more of the sand in the intertidal zone to the point where it becomes very difficult for anything to survive here. So that's what's going on in these photos. Over time, seawalls tend to damage the land and marine life in front of them. It's unfortunate that the seawall comes at a cost to the environment, but I have to be honest here. We live in a city, not Yosemite National Park. We can't expect to have pristine wilderness next to high-rises. But there is another side to this story. The seawall also comes at a cost to us. And when I say cost, I mean serious money. The seawall is not invincible to the waves, and it frequently needs repairs. The city is actually planning on repairing parts of the Stanley Park seawall this summer, and that is expected to cost $1.9 million. That's nothing to scoff at, but there's an even more expensive elephant in the room here: climate change. With rising sea levels and more powerful storms, we can't just keep repairing the seawall. We pretty much have to replace it. A report to the city in 2013 actually recommended rebuilding Stanley Park's seawall and raising it higher above the ground. The estimated cost for that, a cool $130 million. But that's just Stanley Park. Let's not forget that the seawall goes all the way around downtown Vancouver, and that needs to change as well. Another report found that the seawall in False Creek would have to be raised by an average of 2.3 meters, all before 2100. The cost of that, somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 to $850 million. Holy cow. With that in mind, wouldn't it just be easier to get rid of the seawall? Well, I'm not so sure about that either. And it's not because of the hundreds of thousands of joggers that would burn down City Hall. I think there's a much larger dilemma here. The seawall might just be a path, but it clearly means a lot more than that to us. Case in point, in 1988, Vancouver was getting serious about developing the Expo lands, which looked like this at the time. The owner of the site proposed the idea of building islands with high-rises on them, and people hated it. One of the main concerns was that these islands would create an exclusive waterfront area for the rich. Vancouverites wanted a seawall. With that, you realize that the seawall has shaped how we think about waterfronts, that it's a place for everyone, accessible to everyone. The seawall isn't just a path, it's a part of Vancouver's values, its identity. But the main dilemma for me goes back to why we built the seawall in the first place: erosion and change caused by nature. As humans, we've often built our cities and parks with the understanding that their boundaries won't change, but removing the seawall and letting nature take its course will most certainly do that. I was thinking about ending the video there, but then I came across this thesis paper from a student at UBC. She proposes a new design for the Stanley Park seawall, one that allows for natural habitats and limits erosion, all while allowing for people to walk through and connect with the park. Her solution was a network of trails and boardwalks that are much less intrusive on the environment. There wasn't a single wall in sight. It was really interesting to read, but it also gave me hope that maybe we could strike a balance between nature and human activity after all. So with that in mind, yeah, we should definitely not get rid of the seawall, but maybe it doesn't have to be an actual wall. Okay.